Google is getting into gaming, and actually I'm kind of surprised they didn't just call this thing Google Gaming or Google Games, GG. I was telling Kirk before, like, missed opportunity. They're calling it Stadia. I gotta say, it's kind of interesting, this idea, this concept. It kind of makes sense to me. The execution, of course, it's up in the air. We're all skeptical here whether or not it's gonna deliver what Google is claiming, this idea, this crazy idea of 4K top shelf games at 60 FPS streamed over the internet with no need for gaming hardware in your presence. It's kind of an amazing claim. I mean, it makes sense. Everything else you do online is streamed. You can stream 4K video. There's obviously more complexity when it comes to gaming and input and so on, but streaming in general has become the standard in so many entertainment segments, whether you're talking about YouTube, Netflix, music services. Like, who's downloading stuff? You of course never want to download stuff if you don't have to. During the live stream, there was a moment where a person's watching a clip of Assassin's Creed being broadcast by another YouTuber, and then they quickly hit the play button, and they're instantly playing the game. They're playing Assassin's Creed, no download. The idea of that, if it works as advertised and as showcased, is obviously better than stopping what you're doing, going into a transaction, paying for something, downloading it, and then playing an hour later, or who knows how far down the road. And then, in many cases, having to deal with the various stores that different game developers utilize to distribute their games, whether it's EA with their own stuff or purchasing games on Steam and so on. There's some friction introduced through those various services. So when we sat here as a group talking about whether Google can or can't deliver this thing, how excited we should actually be, I thought about Google through the lens of what they've been able to do with YouTube. Because I remember, once upon a time, the idea of streaming 4K video, even via YouTube, seemed insane. It seemed impossible. Google has a tremendous number of resources. They could be the first company to crack this thing. As usual, there's people that are skeptical, and they should be. There are plenty of Google products that come and go. So people have a right to be skeptical, but gaming is this area that's, it's just massive, and Google really has no play. They're not involved in the space outside of YouTube where people watch gaming. So they have the watching piece. It makes sense to add the playing piece. And some of the integration they showed with YouTube, even though who knows if it will be as smooth as they were showcasing it, it just makes a lot of sense. People who play games, watch games, who could have predicted people would be watching as much gaming as they are? People could integrate with the gamers that they're watching and the games that they're watching. They could join in. There's so many cool potential scenarios that could take place by combining these different worlds. Now, the other thing that struck me about this idea coming from Google is that Google, through Android, through Chrome, and their various other products, has reached into places where game consoles and gaming PCs haven't really taken hold, where they're not really popular or ubiquitous. Places like India, China, emerging markets with huge audiences who may not be able to enjoy AAA games at the moment, or maybe their only computing device is the smartphone in their pocket. With this service here, you could potentially take your game as a developer and broadcast it and send it out and make it available to individuals who couldn't possibly be your customers in the past because they didn't own the hardware, they didn't have the big display to play your titles. So during the presentation, they showcased this streaming game service working on smartphones, low-powered laptops, computers, and even on TVs as well. That was kind of interesting. Through Chromecast, they were able to stream, I believe it was a 4K feed, once again, of Assassin's Creed. And apparently the new Doom, they're going to deliver it at 4K 60 FPS by offloading the processing to the cloud, to Google's servers. It's all happening out there. Then you just have a screen and no input lag. And this controller that they launched, which again, I have to try it out, it looks pretty cool, but then they went a step further and said, oh, you can also use any controller you already have. Or of course, if you're on a laptop, You could use your typical keyboard input as well. It has you questioning the viability of all kinds of gaming companies, gaming hardware, gaming software. What happens to Steam? What kind of a connection do you need? There's a lot of questions that come out of a presentation like this. They didn't say a price, and the launch date is kind of vague. They just said 2019. It's got to be delivered first. It can't be laggy. People will not put up with it. It's got to be smooth. It's got to be fast, especially if people are going to use it in a competitive fashion. We need to know how fast the connections have to be, and what about the economics? Are we just buying games at full price like we're already doing in places like Steam? Or is it some type of subscription service similar to Netflix? Is it more questions than answers? Maybe. But at least we know it's a real thing. It's happening. There appear to be developers on board, and this really could change the landscape of gaming in a big way if Google does what they say they're going to do. That's the big question. Can they do that? Time will tell.